I'm Mindy Peterson, and this is Enhanced Life with Music, where we explore the practical ways music transforms everyday life, health, happiness, and beyond. We are currently in the last week of August. Next week here in the U.S. is Labor Day, and here in the U.S., that means we are in back to school time. Even for those of us who don't work in education or have young kids in school, this time of year is sort of like a different New Year's of sorts, with a return to a more structured, focused season of productivity as the fall learning season kicks off. So I thought this time would be the perfect time to bring in today's guest to give us some practical tips for working music into our productivity toolkit so we can hit the ground running as we launch into the fall season. And if you don't have kids at home and you aren't an educator, don't go anywhere. These insights are for anyone of any age interested in how you can use music intentionally to transform your focus, personal growth, and emotional well-being. My guest today is Sara Sherman. She joins me from New York City. Sara is a classical musician and educator whose work has been featured in media including NBC, The New York Times, and Psychology Today. Sara co-authored this year's book release, Resonant Minds: The Transformative Power of Music One Note at a Time. The book explores the profound impact that the purposeful use of music can have on focus and cognitive, emotional, and social experiences. Welcome to Enhance Life with Music, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me, Mindy. I'm happy to be here.
Sara, we talk a lot on this show about how the power of music can be applied in so many ways beyond simply entertainment value. And your book does a beautiful job empowering the reader to use music intentionally for enhanced learning and personal growth. Your book talks a lot about executive functioning skills, and I feel like we hear a lot more about those today in the parenting and educational space and just in optimizing ourselves for flourishing as an adult space. So talk to us a little bit about these executive functioning skills. What are they and why are they so important?
Absolutely. If we think of executive functions like the orchestra of our brain and how everything works together, executive functions help us plan, they help organize, they help focus attention, regulate emotions, shift between tasks. They're the things that help us essentially get through our everyday lives with some structure, with some clarity. And in terms of how we use them all together, it helps with creativity, it helps with learning, it helps with relationships. So whether it's inside the school, outside the school, at home, even as an adult for ourselves, I know sometimes I feel like I have this chaos in my life, and it's those executive functions that help kind of put that clarity and that organization together when I can hone in. And we'll talk more about it, but using music as that tool to help us get there.
Mm. I love that metaphor that you use of the orchestra. And I think in your book, you use that too, and talk about how we all have our own orchestra that we're conducting, whether it's our family life with young kids, a home, whether it's students, if we're in an educational space, or whether it's just our own brain synapses that we're orchestrating. So love that. Some of the different executive functioning skills that we might hear about could be cognitive flexibility. I know in your book you mentioned sort of like four key components, one being cognitive flexibility, another being working memory, inhibitory control, and reflection. But then you also talk about four other skills that build on these and that you see as essential. And there were some others. So I think there's a lot of different words that a lot of us probably use to refer to similar skills. What would you consider sort of the most important ones to focus on for purposes of our conversation today?
Yeah, I'm going to just start going off on all of these because I love
Sure.
the pick. And one in particular that I think is a real core executive function is focus. And it's one of these that we have every single day. We have moments, whether your parent is saying, focus or pay attention. How many times does that come out of our mouths? Or for ourselves, if we have a hard time, whether it's working, sending emails, even talking to a friend, and our brains all of a sudden tune out and like, wait, how did that happen? And I
Right.
like to think of any of these skills, these EF skills, EF short for executive function skills, are things that we can practice. And I don't think they're skills that benefit from practicing individually, but as a part of something. So if we think about focus and we use a piece of music as a tool to help us get there, if we work on active listening, and let's say we play a piece of Bach. I love Bach and Bach cello suites in particular. And we talk about breathing with Bach, and you breathe in for 2 beats and out for 2 beats. All of a sudden, it's giving the listener, whether it's again you or your child or whoever you're working with, if you're an educator or a friend, you're creating this awareness in your own body and your own space of your own breath work, which creates this grounding presence, this awareness. When we practice something like that, it helps us focus in. It also helps lower our cortisol levels. It helps reduce stress. So not only are you working on this skill, all of these physiological things are starting to happen in your body and your brain to help get you grounded.
Mm.
One of the other ones I really like to talk about is this reflection. And I think it does go with in this control, right? This impulse control that sometimes is hard, especially for some children or all of us when we feel angry and you have this feeling coming over you. The more in tune we are with our emotions and this emotional awareness, the more likely we are to have the power to shift when we need to be where we are somewhere and say, hey, this isn't feeling great, or I know that I need to shift where I am because it's impacting those around me. How can I get there?
Which
And
involves
so
self-awareness to begin with.
absolutely. And utilizing a piece of music to do that, it goes back to the lowering cortisol levels or lowering your blood pressure. Music has the power to impact our neurons within 100 to 300 milliseconds. So that's when we blink an eye. If you blink your eye and you think about how quickly that happens, your neurons are firing before you can consciously understand what piece of music you're even listening to and create a thought about that piece of music. So your body's working for you if
That's
you equate
fascinating.
it with
Yeah.
a piece of music. And so it's that awareness within yourself to say, okay, I'm having this feeling, or I'm here and I need to go there. And then having that mindful action, and I'll get more into that, but this awareness to say, I can select a piece of music to help me get there so that I'm not just trying to crawl through it, so to speak, whatever feelings that we're having. And that goes then with this resilience. I think these are all the executive functions are all intertwined with this reflection and this impulse control and shifting between tasks and learning to regulate our emotions.
Well, I like going back to focus. Your
Mhm.
book mentioned this really caught my attention that 76% of public schools reported a negative impact on student learning and behaviors due to a lack of focus. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. And when you talk about having a conversation with somebody and suddenly you realize that you're physically present, but mentally you're not, I am so guilty of that when it comes to my kids. Not so much anymore. As we discussed at the offline as we started our conversation, I'm now an empty nester. But when my kids were living at home, there were so many times I would catch myself doing that. And then later I would ask them a question and they'd say, you asked me that before and I answered it and you don't remember what I said. And I thought, oh man, busted. Like, I know I asked that, and I know that when they were answering me, that's when I was tuning out. So I'm totally guilty of that. So focus, yes, so important. And then you talked about resilience. That's something that you cover quite a bit in your book. And again, so important. We hear so much about loneliness in today's world. We hear so much about mental health in today's world, and resilience can be so impactful on both of those things. I love also how you mentioned the physiological effects of music, whether it's cortisol and its impact on that. I know you talk in the book about oxytocin and the impact that music can have on that and some other hormones and neurotransmitters. So I love how you address that in your book. You talk quite a bit about a lot in your book about mindfulness. Um,
Mhm.
I think all of us have an idea of what mindfulness is, but some of us picture meditation and
Mhm.
some of us picture other things. For purposes of our conversation, how do you define mindfulness?
I love this question because I do think mindfulness can have a very negative impact if it's something that doesn't resonate with you. And I like using the phrase mindful action because mindfulness sometimes is seen as, sitting in a lotus pose and practicing yoga or maybe meditating, but it is so much more than that. And if we think about mindfulness as this idea of creating presence and awareness within ourselves, which then when we have that cognitive flexibility and presence within ourselves, we can work on circles back to the executive function skills and using those. And so I think of mindfulness being this presence without judgment on ourselves. Also, like you said, you have those moments with your children sometimes where your brain wanders and you recognize it. But then part of that mindful awareness is recognizing your thought pattern, even if it's not exactly where you want it to be, but acknowledging it without any judgment on ourselves because it happens to all of us. And the more awareness we have on ourselves and on our thought processes, the more we have the ability then to adapt and to change and become aware of where we want to be. And it's not just about clearing your head, but it's more about tuning in to those own thoughts and your own awareness. And so from mindfulness, I like to use the phrase mindful action because mindfulness to me is something that's almost passive. It's happening through you and to you. But this mindful action is the idea then we can take this awareness and this and presence and purposefully use that awareness to impact ourselves. So whether it's playing a piece of Bach for our focus, whether it's singing along with a song because it releases oxytocin. And if you're in a group, then you're feeling bonded and connected to somebody else. Or maybe this song reminds you of somebody. So then it's releasing some endorphins and it makes you feel happy. Or whether you are having that 4 p.m. slump in the afternoon and you want to take a nap or whatever it is, and you pick a song with 80 to 120 beats per minute because that's about a walking tempo. And that impact for ourselves is just as effective as going for a walk in the middle of the afternoon when we play a beat with that certain beats per minute. And so it's this ability to take that mindful awareness to ourselves and to make it into an action to help support ourselves in our everyday lives.
I love that definition because I do think about meditation when I hear about mindfulness, and meditation is something I've tried. And for me, I've come to decide that meditation works in different ways for me than what I typically think of, like you said, being in the lotus pose and just concentrating on your breath. Concentrating on your breath and just sitting there drives me absolutely crazy. But there's other ways I've been able to apply the concept of meditation in my life personally. But when I hear that word, that's what I think of. And I just kind of have this negative reaction to it. So I like how you're defining it as more awareness and intentionality, because I love the idea of being intentional, of being purposeful. And so that definition is definitely something that really resonates with me, to kind of play off the title of your book there with resonate there. So with all of that we've discussed so far, why music? How is music uniquely equipped to help us develop executive functioning skills, mindfulness, focus, resilience? Staying balanced in life is very important to me. Balance in work and play, activity and rest, and balance in fueling my energy. When I am on the go or just find my cupboards running a little bare, the fuel I reach for is Jam Bar energy bars. These bars are certified organic whole food bars. They're non-GMO and gluten-free. I especially love that they are higher in protein than the other all-natural bars I found, and they're minimally sweetened with only all-natural sweeteners. Well, I love all 5 flavors. My personal favorites are musical mango and tropical trio. Jambar flavor names reflect the company founder's passion for music. And Jambar donates a whopping 50% of net profits to programs that support music and active living. Join me in supporting a balanced life and world by reaching for jam bars. Available at Amazon, select retailers, and jambar.com. Links are in the show notes.
Yes, I want to answer that, but I want to go back to the stat that you said about 76% of students with a lack of focus. And a lot of research is coming out in schools post-COVID, whatever world you want to say we're in right now. It's hard to and the research, we don't really even fully understand the grasp of how much COVID impacted ourselves and our children, or our students. And I think that stat is lumped into some of that, and the way in which we used different ways to communicate. And think, at least based in the States, we did all we could in a really hard time. And part of that, though, was this lack of connection among kids. People were connecting through screens. And in the book, you remember there's a story we talk about with this kid named George. And I like to use music as this idea, and why we use music, because it's this connector for everyone. It's this universal language, whether you like somebody's song or you don't. Part of that also is showing this resilience and this respect for one another, how we said non-judgmental for ourselves, but it's also about showing respect and trying to understand and empathize with our friends, with our neighbors, with our colleagues. And so if you select a piece of music and you play it in a room together, and in this story about this kid, George, who was having a really hard day at school, especially adolescent kids, whether they're thinking, oh, I'm shorter than my classmate, or look at this pimple here, or did I say something stupid? Teenagers and adolescents in particular are so in their heads, which makes sense with everything going on in their bodies. But we can utilize a piece of music and give them the options to, whether it's right, to draw, to think, to breathe along with the music. And when you're giving the autonomy to make a decision, that really helps people take ownership for themselves. But when we have that music on, it's also connecting them, whether they're talking together or they're doing their own self-decided task based on a certain list, because the brain waves in a room of people listening to music start to synchronize. So you're creating that community. And I mentioned oxytocin earlier. All of a sudden, you're having that bonding hormone be released. And then if it's something you do regularly, for yourselves, for students, it starts to have this dopamine impact, and what I like to call of this positive musical habit, where it goes from our explicit memory to our implicit memory. And then this music can become this cyclical thing that we go back to time and time again to get in touch with that emotion. And the more in which we utilize it as a tool, and it being music, the more it helps with that focus for those students. And not just that focus, but it helps with that community building, that less feeling of alone. And because music is the only thing that we know of that activates the whole brain, it works with our amygdala and our emotions, with memory, with language, with movement. And everything's going at once. And that's why when you hear a song, maybe you're brought back to a smell of cookies that you made once when you listened to that song, or another type of memory. And so this whole brain activation is so unique to music that as you can hear, I get so passionate about it. I just think it's one of the most underutilized tools that we use in our everyday lives.
And as you mentioned, the effect is immediate.
Absolutely.
You don't have to wait for it. Instant gratification, instant effect. Love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to point out too, I was thinking as you were just talking about the examples from the classroom that you give in your book about a New York City public school teacher who has brought music into her classroom to enhance focus and engagement, even though she herself is not a trained musician. And I loved that because it really shows how even when you have limited resources and limited musical training and expertise, you can still use these concepts and these principles. You can still put music to work for you and your students to reduce stress in the classroom, to create an environment that's more conducive to learning, that's calm or energetic, depending on what your goals are for that moment, and for creating a more productive environment for yourself and for your students. Or, of course, you can apply that in your home or for yourself. So, love that. Well, in the time that we have left here, I'm wondering if you can give listeners three. Well, there's so many more, and people can definitely get your book and read more about some of these practical strategies and tips that you have in the book. But just to whet our appetite and give us something to hit the ground running for our fall here, can you give us three practical ways that we can integrate music into our daily life this fall to enhance focus, productivity, and emotional well-being, whether it is in a classroom or at work or at home?
Well, because you just said focus, productivity, and emotional well being, my first would be to create an intentional playlist for each of those three different categories: a playlist for focus, a playlist for productivity, and a playlist for emotional awareness. And it's something then that you can come back to time and time again. That idea when you need something to focus, we tend to focus better with instrumental music, with music that doesn't have a lot of high melodies or more lyrical, nothing that kind of sticks out, and low beats per minute. So knowing that that helps us with focus. For productivity, that's really an individual preference. I know sometimes when I like to run, I listen to jock jams or whatever it might be. And there are certain beats that I know get me going in different ways. And also emotional awareness is something that can shift. So having a playlist for each three of those categories that you can come back to time and time again.
I'll just point out too that you have some really great prompts in your book and some great ideas, including utilizing AI to create playlists for various purposes. So, some really good ideas in there. If listeners are hearing this and thinking, I love the idea, but how do I start?
Absolutely. And on our website, we have ideas to start. And even in the book or in this conversation I mentioned back, I always want to be cognizant that my musical selections are not everyone's musical selections, but they're a starting point. And it's taking that same actionable skill, whether it's breathing with music, maybe it's tapping the beat, maybe it's drawing what you hear. It can be applied to limitless different selections out there. And so it's just a starting point. And with AI that you just mentioned, sometimes AI gives us this feedback loop of familiar, if you're on Spotify and then it says, because you like this, you like this. And I always like to say,
Yeah.
we don't know what we don't know. And so I really believe in part of this mindful action and awareness of giving everything a chance. And if you don't like it, that's knowledge, right? We understand then a little bit more about ourselves, but especially if it's a song, maybe someone's like, I really like this. And you're like, oh, I hate country music or whatever it might be. Give it a chance. You don't know. And same with
Sure.
this algorithms that feed back to us.
Great idea. So, create a playlist, number one. What's a second practical way?
To prayer with transitions. I mentioned before these positive habits. So if you have the same song, maybe it's a morning song, maybe it's a get ready for the day song. And even if it seems silly to repeat that same song over and over again, when we go back to that 100 to 300 milliseconds, our neurons start going. It starts to have that automatic response without needing to think, all right, maybe it's your kid and they have a tie their shoe song. And the second that song starts to go, when you have that behavior attached to that song enough times, that behavior starts to become automatic. And
Mm,
so with transitions, it is magical when it starts to work and to sync up, whether at home for yourselves, in the classroom for your students, for your children. I've seen it happen. I use it with my children. I do it for myself. And
mm.
it's so helpful.
I love that, and I wish I would have known about that when my kids were young, because I think it could just be magic to start playing a certain song every evening when it's trying to sort of clean up, wind down, brush teeth, all of that. And then also in the morning, a certain song that you play when you're like getting ready for school, having breakfast. It's just I know I have a song that my alarm is set to, and whenever I hear that, sometimes it'll start playing in out of context, just in a playlist or something like that. And my kids will recognize it. They'll be like, "Mom, it's your alarm," and it does have a certain like I have this Pavlovian response when I hear it. So I love being able to use that idea of a song for transitions. And there's so many great examples in your book about teachers and parents both using this for transitions, like in the classroom. Okay, time to get in line because we're going to head to lunch or, various transitions. call
Mm.
music as students are coming in the morning, maybe a different song when they need to be energized and things like that. So love that. Awesome. Anything else you want to say about that one before we hear number 3?
No, I think that one is just something to be patient with, where it's not, the reaction is automatic to a certain point, but that long-lived attachment takes, like anything, practice and time. It's, that reaction, okay, whether it's shoes, whether it's the door, it's going to take multiple listens to start to have that association, really.
Sure.
Like brushing your teeth, when you learn how to brush your teeth or teach somebody how to ride a bike, it doesn't happen instantly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing about using songs for these things too is that it not only creates a mood and taps into habit over time,
Mm,
but it also gives young students or young kids an idea of what to expect in terms of what comes next, but also the timing. So, for example, I heard one person talk about how they created a song, a brushing your teeth song for their kids. And part of the benefit of that was the kids know how long the song lasts and they know, okay, once the song is over, for the brushing of the teeth is over. Or a parent would say, okay, we're going to clean up for one song in length. So you pick a song, when the song is over, we're done. So it's kind of that expectation of timing too that can be really helpful for young kiddos.
absolutely. That was gonna be so that was actually going to be my 3rd one. I have a 4th one, so this is fine. But
Oh,
it
perfect.
yeah, that if you tell a child in particular, "Hey, we have 5 minutes," and you set a timer, that means nothing. Or,
Mm.
especially for young kids or even a lot of elementary school kids, 5 minutes is something, but it's hard
Yeah,
to
it's
know
a very abstract
you don't
concept.
sometimes. I'm like, what is actually 5 minutes? I lose track of time, but if you have 2
Sure,
songs, especially if they're songs that and you use music as a timer for that, it really helps create this flexibility and this awareness to be like, "Okay, this is the 2nd song, this is done," or whatever it might be. So to use it as a timer as opposed to an actual timer, which we often do. I do that for my own children sometimes, like, 5 more minutes, but that means nothing, and
sure.
I need to work on that skill.
Love it.
But then the 3rd one that I'd say is something that I think is out of people's comfort zones. If you think back, I'm not sure what generation you're from, but the mixtapes, we used to give each
Yeah,
other, burn each other CDs or a mixtape, whatever it was, of songs that we liked. And it was a way of showing someone that you cared about them, that you were thinking about them. I remember, or if you were going on a long car ride and go somewhere with friends, like, hey, I made this CD for us to get there. And when you do that for somebody else, it's saying, like, here I am, and these songs mean something to me, and it creates this bond. And I think with music as this universal language, especially if somebody is not comfortable always using language to express how they feel, music does that for us. And so this idea of selecting a few songs today, maybe it's a playlist, or maybe, hey, I was listening to this song this morning and it made me think of you. I think you'd like it, as this connector to help us bond more with our friends, with our family, with our children, because we're in this world that is so technology focused, which is okay. It's the world that we're in right now, but it's important to get outside of that sometimes and learn to connect with each other in new ways, because I think connecting with one another is so important for our overall well-being and our health. And it's not always easy to do in today's world, but a song can help us get there.
mm. One thing I love about that is our focus today is on focus and productivity. But I like this last recommendation because it keeps the focus on what is truly important in the long run. And that is our relationships. Relationships are the biggest indicator of happiness in the long run. And so I love not getting too caught up in how much I'm accomplishing and how many things I'm checking off my list and how productive I'm being, but keeping in focus and keeping in mind the bigger perspective of relationships really are what matters the most in the long run. So love that final suggestion. Well, I hope listeners, this really whets their appetite for utilizing music in a really intentional way this fall for hitting the ground running as you launch your new year, that the other new year of the fall season and that new season of learning. I want to just leave listeners with a couple of quotes that I really loved from your book. The first one is related to the title, Resonance, and the quote is, "Resonance is not just a musical term, it's a way of life. How we treat ourselves, how we interact with others, and how music vibrates through every part of our lives. That's resonance. Musical, personal, and interpersonal resonance. Pulse, timbre, vibrations synchronized. Life." Love that quote. And then one other that I want to leave listeners with is this: "Today will be legato, a day where each action will flow purposefully and smoothly into the next. Much like a symphony, life has its own sections, some fast and intense, others slow and reflective. With practice, we can learn to transition smoothly using our executive function skills to connect the dots." Beautiful quotes.
Thank you.
Well, Sara, thank you so much for writing this book, for joining us today. As you know, I ask all my guests to close out our conversation with a musical ending, a coda, by sharing a song or story about a moment that music enhanced your life. Do you have a song or a story that you can share with us today in closing?
Yes, I think I'm a pianist first, and I shared a video
Yay.
that this, and I always knew that music and performing were a huge part of me and my being. But that's great to a certain extent, but then what, right? This idea of now what, so what? And playing music for children has changed my life. And all music, whether it's classical, jazz, bluegrass, and there were experiences in the last few years, particular with my work with Mozart for Munchkins, where we've gone into schools or concerts, and it's this moment I like to call shining eyes. You know, when you have a child or that you are making an impact, and that whatever you're doing is reaching them in a way where they don't necessarily have to say anything. You could see it in their eyes. This idea of shining eyes. It comes from a TED Talks. Actually, Ben Zander did a few decade ago, I think. But this idea of shining eyes, and you know when you have those shining eyes in someone. And so it's this moment I had with children, making music for them, with them, and seeing their shining eyes that really filled my heart with love, with joy, and knowing this is it. This is exactly where I am, what I'm supposed to be doing. And I just want to continue to spread more shining eyes, and love and importance of music.
Love that. And there's a video that you shared with me that I'll put in the show notes that relates to what you were just talking about. Can you tell just a little bit of the link between the two?
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of going to schools and working with neurotypical and neurodivergent communities. And in this video clip, you can see all students and them moving to the music, dancing along with us, singing, clapping. And it's one of my favorite videos because it shows this work in action. It lists the important executive functions, actually, that we talked today about focus and how music has this impact, and kind of goes through and bullets them, and really shows this way of community building. And it again, it goes back to those moments and working with these children that just make my heart so full. And I feel very lucky to be able to do this type of work.
Thank you so much to Sara for joining us today and for all she does to enhance lives with music through her work and book, Resonant Minds, The Transformative Power of Music, One Note at a Time. We didn't mention this in our conversation today, but Sara co-authored this book with her father, Dr. Morton Sherman. There are links in the show notes to the book and other ways to connect with Sara and her work. You'll also find a transcript of our conversation and related episodes you may enjoy, including helping children identify, express, and regulate emotions with music, an episode all about the power of purposeful playlists, and an episode all about productivity and music. Since we are at this back to school time of year, I just want to remind you that you can view all episodes organized by category, one of which is education and community. So if you're wanting more education related content and resources as you launch this new learning season, whether it's for yourself, your kiddos, or your classroom, click that link in the show notes or in the archives tab of my website. All Enhanced Life with Music episodes are evergreen, so be sure to check out the back catalog for more ways that music can make your life better. You can always connect with me on email, mindy@mpetersonmusic.com, Facebook, Instagram, X, or LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing this show. It is one of the best ways to help us reach new listeners and to spread the transforming power of music on everyday life. Until next time, may your life be enhanced with music.